So we've been talking about King Ahaz and Isaiah's prophecies to him. Um, and today we're going to get into some more of the meat of it and some of the history behind it. Um, when you read Isaiah, there's a lot of symbolism, a lot of names of people and places that aren't even modern names we use anymore. And so we'll break some of that down, and I think it'll make a lot more sense. So we're starting in verse 30 of chapter 9 of 2nd Nephi. And before we get into the actual text, I wanted to share something that I came across while I was preparing. We've been talking about the duality of prophecy and how, and actually what I found is that not only do prophecies sometimes get fulfilled multiple times, but also events act as a prophecy for something in the future. And I'll show you what I mean by that. So when you look at, when you watch the Prince of Egypt or what the Ten Commandments, those movies, you see all these plagues and you don't really think about why God used those things, flies and boils and all these different things. But if you understand about the gods of Egypt, then it all becomes clear. And so I wanted to share this. So remember the first plague upon Egypt was he turned the Nile to blood. Okay, so the Nile was, in Egyptian minds, was the source of all life. It was, everything relied upon the Nile. It's what made it fertile. It's how they survived. And so he goes right to the source of what they consider to be the source of life, is this Nile River, turns it to blood. And the Egyptians had lots and lots and lots of gods, and they all were for different reasons. And Hapi was the god of the Nile. And so by attacking the Nile, all the Egyptians are now praying to this god Hapi, saying, please save us, and nothing happened. This Hapi our God showed that this God is not a God, right? And so each one of these plagues were related to an Egyptian god, and how our God was showing that he is the true God of Israel. So frogs, the god Heket was a frog-headed goddess of fertility. And they viewed frogs, not that they worship frogs, but they just view frogs as, this sort of kind, loving little sweet creature tied to this god Hapi. Well, now he said, okay, you love frogs? Here you go. And he inundated them with frogs. And praying to Heket didn't get rid of the frogs. So that god was proven to be nothing. So you continue on. Now the third one, some translations say gnats, some say lice. They don't really know exactly sure what my little tiny animal it was. But basically what happened is he turned the dust of the ground into this creature, whether it be lice or gnats. And so Geb was the god of the earth, or the god of dirt. And so now you can say, all right, so the god of dirt didn't prevent the God of Israel from turning this dirt that you think is sacred into this, this swarm of animals that are causing you all this trouble. And Geb didn't do anything about it. And so, it's like God is showing Israel, or showing Egypt right in their face that I'm the God of Israel. I'm the true God, and your God is nothing, right? But he's also showing Israel, you need to worship me, because they were in Egypt for 400 years. And so they had adopted a lot of those Egyptian gods. I mean, they were worshiping Geb. They were worshiping all these gods along with the God of Israel. And so the God of Israel is saying, no, I am the only true God. All the rest of this is idolatry. So he's starting to teach them right away. Then flies, and I highlighted this in a different color because we're going to go into that because Isaiah makes some reference to this. But so God, the Hathor, the goddess of protection, and Uachit, the fly god. This is just an AI image of a fly god. I couldn't find any hieroglyphics or whatever. But anyway, those two gods didn't provide any protection from the flies. And I, it's interesting that flies were a symbol of protection. They actually had fly necklaces that they wore. This one was found in Egypt. It's actually a necklace full of gold flies, and they would wear that as protection, as part of their idolatry. And so here's God saying, okay, you want flies? Here's flies. and he fills Egypt full of flies. Then their livestock, Apis was this god that had the head of a bull, and he symbolized strength and fertility. And God made all their livestock fall dead. They had no strength or fertility; they were dead. Boil, Sekhmet was the goddess of epidemics. I mean, they had gods for everything. The goddess of epidemics, they prayed to Sekhet Sekhmet to get rid of these boils, and no luck, right? And so you can see this message that God is teaching both Israel and Egypt who God really is. So the next one he brought down hail and fire. And I know it looks like nut, but it's pronounced newt. Newt, the sky goddess, Set, the god of storms, and Shu, the god of the atmosphere. None of those could stop the hail and the fire coming down from heaven. Ceres was the god of crops, and Serapis was the protector of the crops. And they prayed to those gods, and nothing happened. They got eaten up by all these locusts that came in. And then they had darkness for 3 days. And this is really profound, because the main god of Egypt, the Zeus, if you will, of their gods, was the god Ra, which was the sun god. And so they saw the sun as a source of heat, and grew the plants and all that. It was like the most powerful god. So now the god that they worship went dark for 3 days. And God says, okay, you want to worship the sun? Well, here you go. No more sun. And so for 3 days, they sat in darkness. And so, and then the last plague was the death of all the firstborn. And that actually kind of smacked the faces of multiple gods. So you got Heget, the goddess of birth, Min, the god of reproduction, Osiris, the god of afterlife and resurrection, and then Pharaoh himself. They believed that the Pharaoh was also a god in human form. And so none of those gods could do anything about losing their firstborn. The only ones that got any relief were those that put the blood across the door, for the Passover. And even Pharaoh himself, who was a god, his own son was taken, right? And so you've got God. This is like so multi-layered and profound. You've got God teaching Israel a lesson, teaching Egypt a lesson, but he's also prophesying. He's using these things to represent future events. And so you've got the darkness for 3 days. Remember what happened when Christ died? We had darkness here on this continent for 3 days. Over in Israel, they had 3 hours of darkness, but still a 3. It's all symbolism. So the darkness for 3 days, and then what happens? The next plague is the death of the firstborn. Jesus was the death of the firstborn, that final death that paid the price for our sins. And so kind of buried within this is a message of Jesus. And it's kind of interesting and that gives a good example of how these prophecies, they layer all upon one another.
All right. Of our Catholic brothers and sisters who have saints for everything,
and
they pray to them.
Yeah.
In vain.
Yeah.
Shane, was this something, when you talk about the plagues, is this something that was like just one right after the other? Just, Monday there was one, Tuesday there was one, Wednesday there was one, or was this over multiple years? Or what?
No, I don't think it's multiple years. I don't remember. I don't want to give you bad info, but I think it was fairly quick. I mean, basically, they went to Pharaoh and said, "Okay, you got all these flies. Now, what do you want to do?" And Pharaoh was like, a couple of different times he said, "Okay, fine, you can leave," but then he backed out of it and said no. But I think it happened in a short amount of time. Yeah.
So it was such that, that's just a coincidence.
Yeah.
Couldn't be.
I don't know. I don't think anybody. Yeah, they all thought it was related to the gods. They thought that the gods were mad at them for something, But everything that happened in life was tied to gods, at least in that time. Well, from the beginning. Yeah, I mean, idolatry, that's been, the Tower of Babel, they thought they could build a tower high enough to get up to God. And, we've always taken God and put him in a physical, way. Yeah, we always want something we can hold, So like Israel, they built the golden calf. The calf, the bull, was a symbol of power in Egypt, but also to the Israel in Hebrew. So they build a golden calf to represent God, but they're praying to this golden calf when he specifically said, "Don't do that." We keep doing the same thing over and over throughout all of history. And I think that's really what's that? Yeah, it's okay. Well, I was going to say that I think that's what Nephi was trying to get across by quoting this. He's saying this has already happened before. It's going to happen again. You all need to turn away from your idolatry and worship the true God. And Israel didn't learn that lesson either. Yeah.
I think it started with Cain. God didn't accept Cain's sacrifice, and because he killed his brother, Cain was sent out. And so therefore, God having rejected his sacrifice, he rejected God and started making his own gods.
Yeah.
Just a quick,
Yeah.
I just thought about this. I was flying back from Lubbock one day and sat beside this young lady that went to school there in Lubbock, and she was Hindu. And somehow we got talking about religion. I don't know. And so I just point blank asked her, I said, "What do y'all worship?" And she said, "Well, you can just really worship whatever. Just kind of pick something, and that's who you need to pray to." And she said, if it's nature or if it's somebody or like, whoa, it's really why?
Yeah. Well, yeah, I mean, look at ancient Egypt. I mean, they're like the god of pestilence. I mean, why would you pray to the god of pestilence? But, somebody probably,
Pray with that.
yeah, exactly. Right. Well, but maybe, maybe you're a farmer. That'd be what you'd pick to try to save your crops. It's crazy. Okay. So getting back into, so I know we've kind of jumped all over the place and it's probably confusing to keep up with. So I made a little timeline so we could kind of follow it. So in 735 BC, Israel, or the Northern Kingdom, and Syria, they united, made an alliance, and began to attack. Well, they wanted to get Judah, the Southern Kingdom, to come in with an alliance with them because Assyria, which was a giant empire, was about ready to attack. So they tried to get an alliance with King Ahaz, or actually with his father, and they were like, "No, we're not going to join up with you." So they began to attack. They're like, "Okay, well then we're going to take over. We're going to put our own king in your land." And so they started attacking Judah. So in that same year that they began to physically really attack hard, King Ahaz becomes the king. He was 20 years old. He's handed a kingdom that's basically at war. Be a horrible situation to have to walk into. So a year later, 734, Ahaz decides to make an alliance with Assyria, the big superpower, to try to keep Israel and Syria from invading. He's like, "Okay, I'll make an alliance with Assyria." Well, what he did was he went into the temple treasury, took out a whole bunch of gold and silver, and he basically bought their safety with Assyria and became a vassal. So basically, they have to pay like taxes basically to Assyria for their protection. This was in 734, so it was after. Yeah. No, it's BC, so it counts down up to Christ. Yeah. And so, and Isaiah was warning him, don't make alliances. Don't make alliances with these other countries, these pagan countries. I'm your God. I will protect you. But Ahaz did not have faith. Ahaz said, "No, we're gonna go reach out to Assyria." And what's crazy is they took out a ton of money out of the temple treasury. Now remember, that was like their tithing. That was, when you went to the temple to your sacrifices, you gave your shekel, and that they'd amassed a big amount of money in the treasury. So they took this money that was supposed to be for God's use and gave it to a foreign nation to trust in them to protect them. So, it was really bad on multiple levels. So then in 732 BC, Assyria invades Syria. So you got Assyria as the superpower, then you got Syria, you got Israel, and then you got Judah. So Assyria attacks Syria. And they end up capturing Damascus, which Damascus was the capital city of Syria. So then in 722 BC, Assyria, now that they've captured Syria, now they move down into Israel and they take the northern kingdom. So in 722 BC, And they'd actually been fighting them for a while, but in 722, they got the capital of Israel, which was Samaria. So like the Samaritans, that was the capital city of Israel, the northern kingdom. And so Assyria conquered Israel at that point and sent, scattered the people all throughout their kingdom, and they basically lost their identity. That's why we have the 10 lost tribes of Israel. It was because of that Assyria invasion into Israel. And during this time, Judah, which is the southern kingdom, is still in effect. That's King Ahaz and then Hezekiah. So in 716 BC, King Ahaz dies. So he wasn't really there very long. He came from 735 to 716 was the only amount of time of his reign. Barely even had any time to do it at all. And then he dies, and his 25-year-old son named Hezekiah becomes the king. And Hezekiah was actually a really good king, although he made some big mistakes. But did you have some? Okay, I thought you raised your hand. Okay, right. Okay, so now 716 BC, King Ahaz dies, Hezekiah becomes king. So now let's continue on. So I'm going to show you some history of Jerusalem, and because I think it'll help in our understanding of this as we read it. But we'll get back in the text here. So it says, "The Lord shall bring upon thee and upon thy people and upon thy father's house days that have not come from the day that Ephraim departed from Judah, the king of Assyria." So what that's saying here, it sounds like the way it's reading, it's like saying Judah is the king of Assyria, but that's not what it's saying. What it's saying here is that God is going to bring calamity upon your people, that since the time that Ephraim, which was the northern kingdom, since the time that this kingdom split, and you got the north and the south, Israel and Judah, since those days, there have not been any days that you have seen like this. And the days that are coming are going to be the king of Assyria. He is going to come in and he's going to change your world. And so God is warning them that things are about to change. You're about to become completely different. And of course, this was before they'd invaded Israel. Israel was still two separate nations, sovereign nations. So then he says, "And it shall come to pass that in that day that the Lord shall hiss." And you'll find this word hiss used in the scriptures a lot. Actually, a better translation would be whistle. It's like to get attention. So, you might whistle at somebody, hey, you. God is going to whistle or hiss or whistle for the fly that is in the uttermost part of the Egypt. Now, obviously, he's not calling flies. This is symbolism. And for the bee that is in the land of Assyria. And so, and we'll talk about that here in a little bit. But I wanted to show you that in Isaiah, the rivers of is added. So the Book of Mormon took out this phrase, the uttermost part of, and then it just says Egypt. So it's not, the Book of Mormon saying it's not just talking about the rivers or like the Nile. It's talking about the nation, the whole nation. And then it says, "And they shall come and shall rest, all of them, in the desolate valleys and in the holes of the rocks and upon all thorns and upon all bushes." In other words, you're not going to escape this. They're going to come into your country. They're going to go into every nook and cranny, and they're going to control you. They're going to be on top of you, and you're going to lose everything. And it's because of your hardness of heart. And so I thought this was interesting. I found this. This is like a necklace that was given to military captains or heroes by Egypt. And it's flies. It's a necklace of flies. And I showed you that little one earlier. The other one was just a one you would wear for protection. This was like a ceremonial one that the pharaoh would give to, a hero of the war. And it was an honor to wear the fly necklace. And how interesting that he's talking about the fly that is in the uttermost part of Egypt. He's saying this fly, this military power, this hero of Egypt is going to come in and he's going to be all through your land. You're not going to escape this. And so he compares these two countries or these two kingdoms, I guess, of Assyria and Egypt to these animals. And so I wanted to break that down. So Egypt, he calls the fly. So roughly from about 1070 to 664 BC, this really fits their kingdom. Their kingdom was constantly in change and upheaval, but they were also, they came in and they had big armies and they were very domineering. Yeah.
It says that the bee of Assyria,
Mm-hmm.
the god of pollination.
No, it wasn't a god. We'll get to it. I'll show you. All right, so it says here, Egypt experienced political fragmentation and vulnerability, making it susceptible to external invasion. So this was a rough period for Egypt. They were kind of up and down. They were known for their hot climate and the prevalence of disease, which the fly is often representative of disease that's carried. But they also used the fly in their society as a symbol of power. So this very thing they worshipped was also this thing that was causing them lots of problems with disease and all that. And so then when you think about a swarms of flies, you think of this kind of like coming from all over, buzzing around, landing on stuff, making you sick, just kind of uncontrollable, sort of a wave of bees, of flies. The bee, on the other hand, is a little bit different. I mean, we might swat at a bee the same way we would as a fly, but a bee is a little bit different. And I find it interesting that he compared the Neo-Assyrian Empire to bees. They were known for their military prowess. They were known for being very organized and very aggressive, and they had a very well-run society. During this time period, Egypt was kind of all over the board and kind of crazy, but Assyria was not. Assyria was a very regimented, very highly advanced, disciplined army. They invented new siege techniques that hadn't been used before. They were one of the first ones to use the steel bow, which they didn't find that out till much later that they used steel. But their bows were steel and they could fire much further and much more accurate than the old wooden bows. And so remember, Nephi had a bow made of steel, right? And that was one of the many criticisms of the Book of Mormon that, they didn't have steel back then. Well, the Assyrians were using steel bows in 700, and it was in the region. It was available. It was just very expensive. But they equipped their army with these bows. And their campaigns were meticulously planned. Everything was very organized, very, kind of like bees. Bees are very organized, very, structured, and they're not all over the place like flies just coming out of the woodwork. I mean, they're very planned. And so it really fits the two empires very well, Isaiah's description. So then he goes on, he says, in the same day shall the Lord shave with a razor that is hired by them beyond the river, by the king of Assyria, the head and hair and the feet of the feet, and it also shall consume the beard. Now, obviously, this is symbolism. They're not worried about getting their head shaved, right? The symbolism here is that in Israel, to shave one's head or to shave off all your hair was like a symbol of disrespect. We would take someone that we captured and we want to make a fool out of them and we shave them bald and just make them, so they probably wouldn't have respected me very much. But that was in their society, hair was something that you kept. Men had long beards, long hair. Even today, Israel, they don't shave their beards. It's a tradition. And so Assyria was going to be used by God like a razor to basically humiliate those that would not repent and come unto him. And later on, we'll see, not today, but later on, we'll see that Assyria was used by God, and then God later punishes Assyria because of their arrogance. You think that you did all this because of your mighty power. You were just being used by me to teach my people a lesson. And so God brought judgment on Assyria as well. But anyway, so we'll keep going here. It says, and it shall come to pass that in that day a man shall nourish a young cow and 2 sheep. This was kind of like the minimum for survival. A young cow with a couple of sheep, you can have milk, you can have a little bit of meat, you can survive. You're not going to be rich, but you're going to make it. And so he's basically telling them that you're going to get humiliated. You're going to get invaded by Assyria. You're going to be poor. You're going to have all your wealth taken. You're going to lose a lot of your men. A lot of your people, your women, your children are going to suffer. But I, your God, will keep you alive. I will keep you going. You're going to have enough. And it shall come to pass that for the abundance of milk they shall give, he shall eat butter. For butter and honey shall everyone eat that is left in the land. And this butter and honey, this is an acronym, or not acronym, what's the word? It's something representative that's used all throughout Hebrew. And it represents having plenty, being blessed. Like the land flowing with milk and honey, butter and honey is the same thing. Sometimes it's translated as curds. It's just having, basically, if your animals are producing milk, then they're well fed, they're safe, they don't have diseases, they're well cared for. Same with honey. If you've got bees that are producing honey, then it means you've got plants that are being pollinated and you're growing crops, so they're symbolic of plenty, of success. And so God is telling that there is going to be hope. You're going to get embarrassed. You're going to get humiliated, but you're going to survive. And God's going to be your God still. So then it continues, and it shall come to pass in that day, every place shall be where there were 1,000 vines and 1,000 silverlings. So this place, this field, that you had this great vineyard and it was very abundant and you were making lots of money. Silverlings are money. It'll become briars and thorns. With arrows and with bows shall men come hither. And I find that interesting that bows and arrows were the main thing that Assyria were good. They used everything. They used swords and everything, but the bows and arrows were their advantage because they could shoot from far away because they had those steel bows. They could go further and they were more accurate. Because all the land shall become briars and thorns, and all hills that shall be digged with the mattock, there shall not come thither the fear of briars and thorns, but it shall be for sending forth of oxen and the treading of lesser cattle. And so he's saying that things are going to be completely transformed. Your society, used to be this way, and now it's going to become this. God's still going to be there. God's still going to bless you, but it's going to be different. Because whereas before you had vineyards and you had all this, land flowing with milk and honey, now it's going to be briars and thorns. And he talks about the mattock, which this is a mattock. And here it says, but it shall be for sending forth of oxen and treading of lesser cattle. So you're going to be able to use the land to feed your cows and feed your animals, but it's not going to be a lush vineyard like it was before. And it's not just talking about the land itself, it's about the people. Everything what you were used to is now going to be changed into something else, but God's going to be able to use it for his glory. And it says, moreover, the word of the Lord, and anytime I put words in red, they're not found in the Bible. Okay? So, moreover, the word of the Lord said unto me, take thee a great roll and write in it with a man's pen concerning Maher Shalal Hashbaz, which actually means speed the spoil, hasten the plunder. So basically, hurry up and bring God's judgment on the people. And I took unto me faithful witnesses to record Uriah the priest and Zechariah the son of Jeberechiah. And these were two, we don't know much about this one, but Uriah was mentioned a couple other times. Now, these were just respected men among the people, probably a leader as far as a royalty. And then he was a priest, the high priest. And I went under the prophetess, and she conceived and bare a son. Now, a lot of this, we don't know if it's symbolism. We don't know if it's, an actual woman. Some people say it's his wife because so Isaiah is saying he went unto her and she conceived and bare a son. So hopefully it was his wife, right? But it may also be symbolic, and it may be both. But it says, then said the Lord to me, call his name Maher Shalal Hashbaz. So in other words, Isaiah has this son, or this woman has this son, brings forth this son, and his name is going to be speed the spoil, hasten the plunder. And then it says, for behold, the child shall not have knowledge. Now, not is found in the Book of Mormon, not found in the Bible. The child shall not have knowledge to cry, my father and my mother, before the riches of Damascus, which was the capital of Syria, and the spoil of Samaria, which was the capital of Israel, shall be taken away before the king of Assyria. The Lord spake also unto me again, saying, for as much as this people refuseth the waters of Shiloh, They go softly along and rejoice in Rezin and Remaliah's son. So there's a lot of stuff there to unpack. There's a lot of names that maybe we haven't heard of or don't make sense. And so, again, Damascus is the capital of Syria. Samaria is the capital of Israel. The waters of Shiloh are the Gihon spring. We're gonna take a little divergent path so you understand what that is and how it ties into history. And then Rezin was the king of Syria. That was the name, the king. And then Remaliah's son, or Pekah, is the king of Israel. So in other words, what he's saying here is that the people are refusing the waters of Shiloh, which was this beautiful, calm, pure spring that ran out right on the outside of the city of Jerusalem. They're refusing that, and they're choosing to seek to protect themselves from these invaders. They're choosing to, provide for their own flesh rather than trusting in God. Okay, so back to the timeline. So the next thing on the timeline, so Assyria invaded Israel, and they take Samaria. The tribes are scattered. Then 716, King Ahaz dies, and Hezekiah becomes king. And then in 701, so he'd been the king for 15 years, Hezekiah built a tunnel and a pool called the Pool of Siloam. And that was to protect the water supply from Assyria. And this is a really fascinating story. And it's kind of a divergent thing, but I wanted you guys to know about it because I found it really exciting and fascinating. So this is a map of ancient Israel, or ancient Jerusalem. And the Gihon Spring was right outside. This is the wall. It was right outside of the wall. And so this water was available. So as Assyria would attack, they could get water, right? So they didn't want them to have water because that's going to help them. Plus, this was their main water supply, Jerusalem's main water supply. They didn't want their main water supply to be outside the city. It didn't, so Hezekiah decided to take upon this major project of diverting all the water from this Gihon spring and bring it inside the city walls. And so what he did, well, first let me read this is out of Chronicles. It says, after these things and the establishment thereof, Sennacherib, king of Assyria, came and entered into Judah. So he'd already conquered the northern kingdom, and he's entering into Judah, right? He's not to Jerusalem yet, but he's entered into Judah. And they're battling as they go, just moving along, battling. It says, and he entered into Judah and camped against the fenced cities and thought to win them for himself. So all the cities in this time usually had walls around them. So everybody gets into the city, and they're all, walled up in the city to protect themselves while they're surrounded by these Assyrians. And Jerusalem was the same way. It says, and when Hezekiah saw that Sennacherib was come, and that he was purposed to fight against Jerusalem, he took counsel with his princes and his mighty men to stop the waters of the fountains which were without the city, and they did help him. And so you remember Ahaz made an agreement to be a vassal of Assyria. And so they were paying tribute to be kind of left alone. Well, Hezekiah, once he became king, he said, we're not paying that anymore. We're done. We don't owe you anything. Well, so Assyria was not happy. They want their money, right? So they decide to invade. So now Assyria is the enemy. They've already taken over. Israel is gone, and so is Syria. Which God warned them. Warned Ahaz, don't make alliances with them. And now here they're going to pay for it. So then it says, so there was gathered much people together who stopped all the fountains and the brook that ran through the midst of the land, saying, why should the king of Assyria come and find much water? So they're saying, why should we let the king of Assyria have access to our water supply? And so he got all his men together, Hezekiah did, and he built a tunnel. And so this was where the spring was. This wall here was not here yet. I couldn't find an illustration that didn't have that wall, but this was just a spring, and then the water ran down through this valley, which is called the waters of Shiloh, and it ran through the Kidron Valley. And so when he was talking about the waters of Shiloh that go calmly along, he's talking about this spring that's right outside of the city walls that runs down into the valley. It's got this clear, beautiful water. It ran on a like a schedule almost. The waters would rise up and start flowing for like 2 hours, and then they would stop. And then like 4 or 5 hours later, it would do it again. It was like this constant, regular schedule. And people knew when to show up to bathe and all that because they knew the waters were coming, and they'd get it done while they were there. And so it was this really beautiful, beautiful stream. And so he used that as to say, you could have stayed with that, which is representative of God, but you chose to trust these other nations for your defense. And so what Hezekiah did was he bored a hole. He had the men start at the beginning of up here and then down at the bottom, and he bored a hole underneath the whole city. And you can see that it's like winding around, and that's not just because it's a bad drawing. It actually does wind around like that. And they don't know if it's because the rocks were harder in certain places or whatever, but somehow they met in the middle. I mean, they were underground, and they were able to find each other and met up in the middle. And they created this tunnel so that it would run the spring of Gihon underneath the city, through there, and then end up in this pool of Siloam. And so all the spring water coming out of that Gihon spring would go and end up in that pool, which was inside of the city walls, protected from the Assyrians, so they couldn't get to it. And so it was this huge project. I mean, major project, very difficult to do. And what's really cool about this is that you can see it today. You can actually take tours. You can walk in the water, the spring water, and actually go through the whole thing. You can walk right through it. It's still there. And it's 1,750 feet long, so about a quarter of a mile long. And inside the tunnel in 1880, this 16-year-old boy was just fooling around in the cave. To him as a cave, and look, he fell. And as he was getting up, he looked up and he saw writing up on the wall that he hadn't noticed before. And it was this inscription, and they call it the Siloam inscription. And it gives detailed explanation on how they built the tunnel. So that's how we know how they did it, was because they found this inscription. So it was found during the time that the Ottoman Empire had control of Jerusalem, and so they took the inscription back to Turkey, and it is still in Turkey today in the Istanbul Archaeology Museum in Turkey. So you can see it today. And so there's something else too that Hezekiah did. So he built this. So the pool of Siloam is here, and that's where all that water from the Gihon spring gathered up. And he built a road that ran from the spring, or from the pool, up to the temple. And so what they did was they would do all their, so anytime you went to the temple to do Passover, any of the feasts, you had to be clean, right? So the people would wash in this pool of Siloam, and then they would begin this journey up this road, and they called it the Pilgrim's Road. And when the Romans came in 70 AD and destroyed the city, they didn't just destroy the temple, they also destroyed all the houses along here and burned everything. And they basically made it disappear. They covered it in rubble, and then then they got conquered, as other kingdoms came in, the Ottoman Empire, they just built on top of it. The Byzantines, they just kept building on top of it. So this road was long lost to history until recently. And so, if you remember, when I was reading from Josephus, who was a Jewish historian, in 75 AD, or 80, which was about 5 years after the Roman conquest, he said in there that they tore down the houses too. They didn't just tear down the temple itself. They also tore down all the houses. They just left the place in ruins. They left these towers. They left some of these towers intact, but everything else was destroyed. And it was to show that the might of Rome, that they just completely obliterated them. And they left the towers to show that there once was a people here, and they're not here because of us. It was a bragging rights thing. Okay, so so then this road was actually improved upon by Herod the Great. And in 30 AD, which was right when Christ was beginning his ministry, Pontius Pilate built basically paved it. He brought in big slabs of stone and built stone steps for the whole length of the road from the spring all the way up to the temple. And I'm sure that some of that was political, I mean, as far as trying to please them, or whatever. But this became like their main thoroughfare. I mean, this was like, Fifth Avenue or what. I mean, this was like their main thoroughfare. And so so it ended up getting a lot of like businesses all along it, because everybody filtered through the Pool of Siloam for all the feasts. They went to the Pool of Siloam and they're on the way to the temple. And so it made sense to set up their shops, all along that way. And so when they destroyed it, basically all these like places that had jewelry and spices and, animals for sale and all that stuff just got covered up and destroyed and smashed. And so, as they've excavated it, they've been finding all this cool stuff that was like straight out from 2,000 years ago, untouched, because it got buried right away, from the Romans. And it was used for this pathway was used for Passover, Feast of Weeks, and Feast of Tabernacles, which are like 3 major holidays in different seasons of the year. So this thing was being used year round. So I wanted to show you a couple things about it that I thought were really fascinating. It was built with 10,000 tons of limestone slabs. And I find it interesting that Pilate is the one that built it. When you think about history, and we've all read it from the Bible. So this is it. It's there today. They've actually excavated it, and they came across it accidentally. And they've known about a few of the slabs, for multiple years, but they finally were able to actually go and dig the whole thing out. And it's actually completely underground right now, because so many years of first the destruction, in 70 AD, and then all these years of people building churches and stuff on top of it, it ended up putting it basically underground. And also right above this is a Muslim community. And so they can't just come in and say, well, we want to find this holy road, this Jewish, without displacing all this Islamic people. And so what they've done is they're burrowing underneath the, modern city, and putting it, they dig a little bit and they put these archways in, and then they dig a little bit more and put another arch. And as they dig, they're finding all these really cool things. And so you could actually walk on the actual stones that were on this same road that Jesus probably walked, right?
Looked a little rough.
What? Yeah. Bring good shoes.
Yeah.
And so there's just some guys working. They meticulously it's all being done with the Israel Antiquities people, and they take a little bit of dirt and they filter it out, and they're looking for every little, thing. They're putting pottery back together. And I mean, it's amazing the scope of this. They've also found that Romans they found some Roman houses in the center of the road. So there were several spots along the way where Romans were like, okay, I'm going to build right where that road was, and they used some of the stones from the road to build their houses. And so from that Roman occupation, they actually kind of sort of desecrating this pathway that was sacred. And so there's another shot. But you today it goes all the way from the Pool of Siloam all the way up to the Temple Mount. You can go through it today, and it just got open like last year. I mean, it's new.
Did they say it was air conditioning?
Yeah, that's what these pipes are. It's underground, so I think you're good.
Not back then, I'm talking.
Yeah, right. They're really advanced. Yeah, I don't know if it is or not, but it's underground, so I'm sure it's fine. Anyway, I wanted to read this out of Exodus. So it says, and this is talking about the robe that the high priest would wear. Okay, it was very specific. Said, and they made upon the hems of the robe pomegranates of blue and purple and scarlet and twined linen, and they made bells of pure gold, and put the bells between the pomegranates upon the hem of the robe, round about between the pomegranates, a bell and a pomegranate, a bell and a pomegranate. So they had a bell and a pomegranate, alternating around the hem of the robe of the high priest, made of pure gold, and they had to like rattle when they walked. They'd hear him coming, And so it says, round about the hem of the robe to minister in as the Lord commanded Moses. So they were told by God to wear this kind of silly looking outfit, right? Look what they found. In 2011, when they first started doing their digging, they found this gold bell that matches that description perfectly right on that road. Now, we don't know if that was off the high priest's robe, but it makes sense that they would lose them. They would get knocked off, whatever. But anyway, they found that one. This is a bronze ring they found in 2018. This stuff is, intact because Rome came in so fast and knocked everything over and buried everything that so many things got lost through that process and then covered up. So we're just sort of uncovering this preserved ground that hasn't been opened up for 2,000 years. This is a tabletop. So they would have had tables all along the route selling their goods to the pilgrims that came. So this is made out of stone. It's, pretty elaborate, but it was just a tabletop that probably was along the road selling bracelets or whatever, spices. This is a stone container that had 9 individually little carved, chambers in it. And, it could have been for whatever, beads or spices or jewelry or who knows, food maybe. And so up until 2004, they thought this was the Pool of Siloam, which because it does connect to Hezekiah's tunnel. So they thought, well, that's the Pool of Siloam. Well, it didn't really fit very well because it was too small. Based on the descriptions where people were coming from all over, thousands of people are coming through this thing. It'd be hard to getting thousands of people through this little water hole, Well, then in 2004, they were doing some repairs in the city a little further down, and a water main broke. And so they went in and they were digging out, trying to get the water shut off and all that. And when they finally cleared it away, they found a staircase. And they're like, what's this? So they started excavating all around it. And this is what they found. And this is only one side of the Pool of Siloam, and it keeps going down. This thing was huge. It was like multiple acres big. And so today, this is all dirt and debris that is mounted up. This is not there right now today. It's all been dug out with bulldozers, and I didn't have a good picture. But they're actually excavating it to make the whole thing viewable and visible and, to where you can go to it. But you could imagine people coming from all around, walking down these stairs to get into the pool, to get cleaned up, and then head up to the temple to do your worship, And so, it says this same Hezekiah also stopped the upper watercourse of Gihon and brought it straight down to the west side of the city of David, and Hezekiah prospered in all his works. And there's the Pool of Siloam there. And then there's just a bigger, artist rendition of what it probably looked like. But you can, and this is that road that you walk up and you go all the way to the Temple Mount. I just thought it was pretty neat that you can actually go and walk that same spot today,
The thing that's so impressive to me is the ability to do that. I mean, we have some pretty nice equipment these days,
Mm-hmm.
but as far as we know, all they had was oxen and a round wheel and carts. And I mean, how did they move tons and tons of stone?
Right.
How did they carve
Aliens.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It must have been big people.
Yeah. Right. Right.
How did they carve that? They didn't have Black and Decker and
Yeah.
Milwaukee and,
No.
No.
We really underestimate how smart those people were.
Yeah.
Oh,
And how
absolutely.
ingenuitive.
Yeah. I think a lot of it is our evolutionary mindset, because we think societies keep getting better and more advanced as they go, and that's just not the case. There's temples and stuff built today that we have no idea how they did it, and we couldn't do it if we wanted to. Those stones that are the size of this room, how are they moving them around? Giants, aliens, right?
Or is there any plans that you know of development for high-rise hotels?
I don't know. Hopefully there won't be right there. But right, yeah, the tourism. Yep. Do what?
Well, they had some time to do it.
Yeah,
It took a long time
yeah,
to do all that. They didn't have cell phones and had to spend an hour in traffic to get to work and stuff like that.
yeah.
Yeah, they weren't defeated by district courts or anything.
Yeah, they didn't have zoning laws to worry about.
They have steel-toed boots.
Yeah, right. Oh, I'm sure.
Got their toes.
Oh, my goodness.
Right. And orange vests. I'm sure they had orange vests, right?
Hard hats.
Hard hats. Yeah.
They did have time constraint, knowing that they were, had imminent attack coming.
Mm-hmm.
So they must have had to work pretty fast, because that's a huge feat,
Yeah.
knowing that they were, in danger.
Yeah. For the tunnel, they did have to go really fast because they knew, their lives were on the line. Mhm.
Don't forget knee pads.
Knee pads, right? Okay, so I wanted to share one more thing about the Pool of Siloam, and we'll probably end it here. But so this is in the scriptures. This is I think it's out of, I forgot where it's at, but the reference is at the bottom. So it says, when he had thus spoken, this is talking about Jesus. When he had thus spoken, he spat on the ground and made clay of the spittle, and he anointed the eyes of the blind man with the clay. So this man that had been blind from birth, Jesus spits on the ground, makes mud out of it, and puts it on the guy's eyes. And said unto him, go wash in the pool of Siloam. And so in that same pool that Hezekiah built, he told this man, go wash in that pool. And remember, that pool was where you would go to get cleansed before you went up into the presence of God. And now here's Jesus, who is God in flesh form, saying, go cleanse yourself in this pool. And as soon as you do, you're going to be healed. He didn't need a temple because the temple, which was Jesus, healed him right then and there. He says, he went his way, therefore, and washed and came seeing. The neighbors, therefore, and they which before had seen him that he was blind, said, Is not this he that sat and begged? Some said, this is he. Others said, he is like him. But he said, I am he. Therefore said they unto him, how were thine eyes opened? He answered and said, a man that is called Jesus made clay and anointed mine eyes, and said unto me, go to the pool of Siloam and wash. And I went and washed, and I received sight. And so I love the story of how this pool got built. It got built basically out of fear, and because of the results of the sins of the people trying to trust in these foreign nations instead of their God. But God still was able to use their idolatry and their fear and their lack of trust to symbolically still bring healing to those that are blind. And I think that's really the lesson in this for all of us, is that, he just wants us to repent and to trust him. And being able to go and walk and see this place where it was identified clearly where it is pretty cool. So we'll continue on next week, where we're going to talk about Isaiah and how he continued this prophecy, and how he compares Assyria to like a rising flood that comes in to destroy Judah. So till then, thanks.